I need to tell you I was on, and probably still am on, security lists. Not because I'm a crook, I really am not, but because I have been opposed to every war that my country has fought since my birth. And that's a very quick way to get on the government's blacklist. Well, thanks to Tom for that introduction, but also, of course, and principally for the invitation. And thanks to Dave Gano for facilitating my presence here with you. It's really a delight and an honor to be here. The talk I have is called Simplicity and Sanity. Those two words are connected in a way that I will sketch towards the end of the talk. I was grateful for the chance to think harder about simplicity and what that might have meant for Thoreau and what it could mean for us now today. I bear in mind Thoreau's response to the young farmer in Walden that he quotes. He said the young farmer came to him and said, you know, I would do what you're doing, living by a pond in a cabin, if I had the means, meaning if I could afford to, but I've got a family and I've got a barn and I've got cows and so forth. And Henry's response was, I don't want you imitating me. I want you thinking authentically about your own life. And I think that's the deepest invitation that Thoreau makes to all of us. It's one thing to honor him, to remember him, to learn from him, and that's profoundly important. But it's more important, I think, to think as hard and as rigorously and as searchingly about our own lives, our own time, our own condition, as he did about his life and time and condition. The first time I assigned Walden in an undergraduate class, I opened our discussion of the book by asking students for their initial reactions. A man wearing a tie-dyed t-shirt quickly raised his hand to say he was surprised that a writer as famous as Thoreau would use so many cliches. When I asked for an example, the student answered, like if you don't march along with everybody else is because you're stepping to the beat of a different drummer. My mom has that on her refrigerator. I agreed that the different drummer must be weary by now, having been trotted out so many times. But I pointed out that when Thoreau used the metaphor, it had been fresh and vigorous because he had made it up. Indeed, I explained Thoreau had made up dozens of expressions that have become part of our common awareness, if not always of our common speech. Then I recited a few examples, some of which are on t-shirts in this room right at this moment. Then another student asked me a shrewd question. Was Thoreau voicing ideas nobody had ever thought of before, or was he just finding new ways to convey old truths? As an aspiring young writer who had only recently fallen under Thoreau's spell, I answered that his thinking was as original as his writing. At the time, I understood original to mean novel or unprecedented, something utterly new under the sun, roughly what my students and hip colleagues meant by calling something cutting edge. Over the years since then, having read more widely, I realized that one could find precedents for virtually all of Thoreau's central ideas. From sources close to him in space and time, such as Emerson, from sources long influential in the West, such as the Greek philosophers or the Bible, and from more remote sources that were only just beginning to reach America, such as ancient Buddhist and Hindu and Taoist thought. Over those years, I also came to understand that word originality does not mean novelty. It means going back to origins. Thus, when Emerson famously demands in the opening paragraph of Nature, why should not we also enjoy an original relation to the universe. What Emerson is exhorting us to do is to encounter things directly and not merely through scriptures or hand-me-down notions or intermediaries, such as ministers or pundits or, yes, famous conquered philosophers. He is urging us to probe the depths of existence for ourselves, accepting nothing on hearsay or faith. The Latin root of the word origin means to rise, to give birth, to set in motion. To be original, therefore, is to seek the source from which all things rise, including our very being. Thoreau was just that kind of seeker, and not only for the 2 years and 2 months and 2 days that he spent living beside Walden Pond, but for his entire adult life. He was original in the deepest and truest sense. He was a radical, going back to the roots. I suspect that Thoreau would have felt amusement mixed with scorn for those who brag of being cutting edge because they wear the latest fashions, or own the latest electronic gizmo, or spout the latest lingo, imported typically from France. Novelty was never his goal. His goal was integrity. He strove for wholeness, the union of life and thought. The motive for his tireless observation, reflection, reading, and writing was not merely to gain a deeper understanding of our mysterious existence, but to practice that understanding, to act it out moment by moment and year by year. Of course, he did not act out his ideas or values perfectly. No one does. But he dramatized the effort to do so with unrivaled power. We learn of his effort from the testimony of people who knew him and from biographies, but mainly from his own account, written in one of the most compelling prose styles ever created by an American writer. The combination of radical thinking, deliberate living, and literary brilliance has drawn countless readers to Thoreau, especially those who sense there is something profoundly wrong with the vision of the good life offered by our own industrial, technological, and materialistic society. In America, one can trace a lineage of dissident souls profoundly influenced by Thoreau. John Muir, Aldo Leopold, Helen and Scott Nearing, Anna and Harlan Hubbard, Thomas Merton, Edward Abbey, Wendell Berry, and a great many others, all of whom found in Thoreau, if not the inspiration, then at least the confirmation of their own efforts at rethinking the meaning and conduct of our life. I belong to this lineage of writers inspired by Thoreau, however humble my place might be. After 40 years of reading him, I am more impressed than ever by the power of his example and the vigor of his prose, and I am at times astounded by the prescience of his social critique. To help explain his continuing hold on the imagination of so many readers and to illustrate his uncanny relevance to our own time and our own dilemmas, I want to examine this key element in his philosophy, this call for simplicity. I now have the official Simplicity, Simplicity t-shirt, so I'm an authority on this idea. His most emphatic use of the term appears in another passage that has been quoted on posters and refrigerator magnets and t-shirts, one you all know from the 2nd chapter of Walden. Our life is frittered away by detail. Simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. I say, let your affairs be as 2 or 3, and not 100 or 1,000. Instead of 1,000,000, count half a dozen, and keep your accounts on your thumbnail. Simplify, simplify. Instead of 3 meals a day, if it be necessary, eat but 1. Instead of 100 dishes, 5. And reduce other things in proportion. The nation itself, with all its so-called internal improvements, which, by the way, are all external and superficial, is just such an unwieldy and overgrown establishment, cluttered with furniture and tripped up by its own traps, ruined by luxury and heedless expense, by want of calculation and a worthy aim, as the million households in the land. And the only cure for it, as for them, is a rigid economy, a stern and more than Spartan simplicity of life and elevation of purpose. It lives too fast. During the century and a half since Thoreau wrote those lines, every threat he identified has become more acute. The multiplication of activities, the proliferation of technology, the accumulation of stuff, the accelerating pace, and the lack of any worthy aim, his phrase, worthy aim for the whole frantic pursuit. How might the embrace of simplicity counter these threats? Consider technology. Among the internal improvements Thoreau called into question were the telegraph and the railroad. It is an illusion, he wrote in Walden, to assume that new technology, merely because it is new, represents a positive advance. From Walden, then, our inventions are wont to be pretty toys, which distract our attention from serious things. They are but improved means to an unimproved end, an end which it is already but too easy to arrive at, as railroads lead to Boston and New York. We are in great haste to construct a magnetic telegraph from Maine to Texas, but Maine and Texas, it may be, have nothing important to communicate, as if the main object were to talk fast and not to talk sensibly. Well, reread that passage and then look at the photographs of people standing in line to buy the iPhone or whatever the latest gadget is. Or watch your students, as I watch my students, immediately check their phone messages as they leave class and ask, how many of these communications are worth communicating? And what do they not pay attention to in the meantime?